Here we have a simple diagram of our shack cube interferometer. We have a Heaney laser to an objective lens to focus our light into a pinhole which acts as a spatial filter, where one beam reflects off of the beam splitter in the shack cube to a reference lens, which 4% of that reflects back in order to create our reference wavefront, and then the other is transmitted through to the test optics, which is either our concave mirror or our concave test lens, and then it recombines with the 4% to form an interferogram. A shack cube interferometer has a reference wavefront which interferes with another beam to create the interferogram, whereas a shear plate interferometer interferes with itself to create the interferogram.
The top graph here is a sample wavefront error at y equals 0. In the interference pattern below, each bright fringe corresponds to an OPD error equal to a multiple of the wavelength.
Zero pupil coordinate, we can see that they will interact less, whereas as we get to the edges of the pupil, they interact more and produce more closely spaced fringes, as we can see over here, with a large central fringe and then increasingly small fringes on the edge.
Concentric circular fringes represent spherical or defocus. The difference between the two can be seen in these two plots. The wavefront increases much more rapidly at the edge of the pupil for spherical aberration.
Here's our actual lab setup, and we can notice that on our microscope objective, the adjustments actually move the microscope objective itself, whereas in previous labs we've moved the spatial filter by itself. This keeps the shack cube in place. In order to set up the shack cube, we first blocked the output to view the reflection from the spherical mirror to make sure we had a uniform output on the screen. We then adjusted the mirror, first adjusting defocus to make sure that the mirror would focus light onto the back surface of the shack cube. After that, we adjusted tip and tilt to make sure all of our reflections matched up on the back surface. Reference image is formed by a reflection off of a glass air interface. We know that only a small amount of light will return back to our screen, about 4%, so we need to cut down on the light returned from the mirror in order to improve contrast and visibility of fringes. We do that by using a linear polarizer.
When we're testing the mirror, the light that gets reflected back from the shack cube is much dimmer than the light that gets reflected from the mirror. So we use a polarizer to make the intensities match and the fringe visibility goes up.
We also came across an exclusive bit of knowledge, which we'll share for you in hopes of getting more points, that if you use another polarizer, you can get cross polarizers, further cutting down on the light return from the mirror and improving the polarization of light return to the screen, which thereby improves fringes seen.
To introduce the defocus on the system, we turned it off on the inside and outside for defocus. And as you see, now we are at the no fringe and we're going the inside of the focus. You can see the fringes changes. For the outside.
So we defocus, you can see the pattern changes. We go more towards straight lines instead of circular patterns.
Using the concave lens instead of the mirror. For this case, the light intensity is even for both arms, so we don't have to use the polarizer. And because of the short focal length and only 4% of light is reflected from the lens, this setup is extremely sensitive.
As we can see here, this setup with the lens is incredibly sensitive. Like, breathing on it makes it go completely haywire, and it's not fun.
Testing with the lens, we were unable to get a picture of the null fringe because it was so sensitive. However, we were able to view our system with defocus and tilt. As we increase tilt and defocus, we see that the fringe spacing similarly decreases, as well as the null fringe center moves off center.
Here's the MATLAB code we use to estimate how many waves of each aberration are present.
These are the best focus positions for both the lens and the mirror. They are both imperfect, which likely impacts the other fringes in this lab. These fringes represent various defocus positions. As defocus increases, the number of concentric fringes also increases. When tilt is introduced at best focus, linear fringes appear and increase with increasing tilt. When tilt is introduced at constant defocus, the center of the fringe pattern moves off axis. When defocus is introduced at constant tilt, the center of the fringe pattern stays in place, while the number of concentric fringes increase.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's pretty good. That's better than what they.
What happened?
I don't know, I'm just hovering over here. I'm just hovering.